Good morning, everyone. My name is Nenadić. I'm a research fellow with the Center for Media Pluralism and Media Freedom here at the European University Institute. I welcome you all here in presence, in the room, and also online. Again, thank you for joining us for this seminar on the occasion of the World Press Freedom Day in this super electoral year with major global crises and wars. We are indeed witnessing a growing crackdown on freedom of expression, on media freedom, and freedom and safety of journalists to do their job, which is not just a job, but rather a watchdog mission in the public interest. And so therefore it is at the core of a healthy democracy. We decided to convene this seminar on this special day to unpack some of the key systemic challenges confronting journalism and press freedom today. We will open the discussion by presenting you some of the insights, some of the observations that we came up to throughout the work or the research that has been carried out under the Center for Media Pluralism and Media Freedom. To be a little bit more specific, we will reflect on some of the key findings deriving from our flagship project, which is the Media Pluralism Monitor, that has been implemented regularly for a decade now, to assess risks to media freedom and pluralism in all EU member states and in candidate countries. And throughout within the Media Pluralism Monitor, we've been addressing various dimensions to media pluralism, ranging from fundamental protection of journalism and freedom of expression, market plurality, or the competition in the media market, however we define media market nowadays, political independence and social inclusiveness. And as far as I know, the next results of the Media Pluralism Monitor should be published in about a month. We will discuss the insights also from another project carried out under the CMPF, which is Local Media for Democracy project, where research was conducted to map conditions for so-called news deserts in Europe, so that the problem could be addressed through supporting local, regional, and community media in areas where independent local news is lacking. The CMPF is also part of another project, which is called the European Digital Media Observatory, that focuses on understanding and to some extent responding to the problem of disinformation, excuse me, in a multidisciplinary way. Within that project, we coordinate research on policy. So looking at how policies are being developed in the area of tackling disinformation and ensuring transparency and accountability of platforms and other relevant actors in the information sphere. The seminar aims somehow to shed light on the structural problems that journalism and press freedom are facing today, but we don't want to stay on the negative note, so we also want to look at the positive developments. And especially here in Europe, we have a big set of new instruments, including legal instruments, to somehow respond to these challenges. I will now share my presentation also for the people online to be able to see it. Let's see if this is the right one. I think it is. Okay, I think it works. So before I start, I would also like to say that I'm surrounded here with colleagues from the EUI, from different parts of the EUI. And I'm also very happy that I have my colleagues with me who will be speaking about some of the other issues that we will be discussing here today. So starting from my left, here is Elda Brogi, who is a scientific coordinator of the Center for Media Pluralism and Media Freedom. Next to her is Professor Luigi Parcu, who is the director of the Center for Media Pluralism and Media Freedom. Roberta Carlini, who is a part-time assistant professor also at the CMPF, and Urbano Reviglio, our research associate, who will be focusing mostly on the Local Media for Democracy project. So without further ado, I would continue with a topic that I've been interested very much in, and so basically I'll give you a very superficial overview of some of the key risks and challenges that journalism as a profession, as an institution, and also as the core of press freedom or media freedom is facing with today. So ranging between some of the old very old historical risks to journalism to very new challenges that the profession has been facing with. As I said, my overview, considering the limited time we have, will be very superficial, but I will be very happy to dive deeper into some of the issues if you're interested in. So basically today, media and journalism face a complex set of challenges. On one hand, they grapple with long-standing issues such as undue influences of political and commercial powers, including those of advertisers and of owners of media companies, and are increasingly also facing with undue influences of digital platforms who have positioned as key intermediaries in the digital information sphere. Then we'll look briefly into the issues related or opportunities related to generative AI. To what extent is this technology and its mass use and application growing on journalism? And whether to the same extent or to a similar extent, it is also growing journalism or supporting journalism to grow. We'll touch upon information integrity and the potential for us to have a shared reality, which is an important aspect of democratic deliberation. And then I also want to look a little bit into towards the future. So what is the future of journalism? Not looking only or not focusing only on technology, but also on the humans in the loop, by focusing mainly on youth in the aspect of news media or journalism audiences, but also youth talent in journalism. How are we standing on these issues, and how can we make sure that youth is actually playing for journalism or is motivated to join journalism rather than the opposite? So starting from the undue influences and focusing first on those more traditional ones, what we've been observing throughout a decade of the implementation of the Media Pluralism Monitor is that there is a set of very strong, persistent risks of undue political and economic interference with press freedom and journalistic freedom. And here I'm showing you two maps, but we are looking actually at many dimensions related to political independence of journalism. So we're looking, for example, at the politicization of ownership, be it through direct political ownership or indirect cases of conflict of interest where people who are holding government office are also participating in media ownership and so on. But what I wanted to show you here is the situation with public service media in Europe, or the governance and editorial line in public service media, because I think this is a very illustrative example of how we stand on political independence today. And the red color means a high risk. So wherever you see a red color, this is not a good sign. Yellow means medium risk. So again, suggesting some of the issues in the processes of the or lack of safeguards against politicization of the appointments of the PSM governance and the independence of editorial line within the PSM. And so what I want to emphasize in relation to this map is that, so throughout all these years of the implementation of the Media Pluralism Monitor, we are not seeing much progress. We are not seeing the improvement of the situation regarding the independence of public service media. And this is what is a problem, because we need the role that public service media plays in a society, and maybe even more today than ever before because of the information disorder. And we need probably as a society adequate transition somehow of public service media into the digital realm, but how can we support public service media that hasn't even achieved political independence in the traditional realm? So those are the challenges that we're facing on this front, or the press freedom is facing on this front. The other map shows editorial autonomy from commercial and owners' influence, again, a lot of red and yellow, which suggests that safeguards against undue influences of owners and other commercial influences, such as from advertisers, you know how they say, he who pays the piper calls the tune. So it's very important to have this map in mind when thinking about the independence of newsroom or the potential for journalists to do their job without undue commercial influences. And then moving on to platforms, this is becoming sort of a new layer of pressures and to some extent even censorship to vis-a-vis journalism, because of the very important role that these digital tech companies are playing in today's information environment, the fact that they are becoming the central key infrastructure for people to access news. News media organizations took the path of adjusting to the platform logic, so changing their practices, values, and organizational structure to better adapt to technologies, content policies, and business models of these powerful intermediaries. This resulted in news media organizations being significantly dependent on platforms for distribution, for reaching and interacting with audiences, and therefore also for attracting advertisers. So in a way, digital platforms are intermediating between the media and journalism, their audiences and advertisers. Can you help? Sorry, we just realized that the slides online are not moving, so we'll try to fix this problem in a second. So I will just stop for a second with the map because obviously you couldn't see it before, and this is the story that I wanted to tell about so-called traditional risks to media freedom and media pluralism, which stem from undue political interference and undue economic influences, primarily through ownership, but also other commercial means, mainly related with advertisers or advertising, which is still the main source of funding for the media. And then I moved on to speak about platforms as somehow a more recent layer of potential undue influences and some very obvious undue influences over media and journalistic freedom. And so basically what I said is that because news media grew into this significant dependence on platforms for reaching audiences and also advertisers, they are changing their own logic, the logic of the profession, some of the professional practices, and also approach to this new environment. And we've seen that the media organizations and journalists have done a lot of mistakes, if you want, in the initial stage of adjusting or adapting to this platform logic or to the new environment when they tried to be first on the cost of being accurate and complete. And in long term, this created a lot of consequences for the profession that we will touch up on a little bit later. And in this new environment, there is another feature that is important to keep in mind, and this is the fact that the news content, that journalism is divorced from the news outlet on these platforms. So individual pieces of content, they travel detached from their original home, which is the news outlet. And how they travel is decided somehow by our human nature, so what kind of content we mostly interact with and how we respond to different pieces of content, but it's also very much determined by the platform content policies and their content moderation practices. So when they design their content policies, when they make decisions that they want to show more content by family and friends than from publishers, or they want to show less news and they want to show less political content in a super electoral year, then this has implications on the democratic role of media and journalism, defining their reach. And in alliance somehow with this, it also has consequences on the economics of media, because less reach means less money, to put it in very simple terms. So again, this new environment has amplified or has advanced the problem of misinformation and disinformation. I will not go into details of this topic because a colleague of mine will speak about this a little bit more, but there is definitely a situation in which social media platforms have created a potential for diverse voices to be heard. Some of these voices are contributing pluralistic debate. Some of these voices are not contributing pluralistic debate and are actually leading either to information overload or information disorder. We've been seeing and observing a lot of domestic, but also foreign interference into the public opinion forming, with a lot of undue influences, especially in high-intensity events such as the pandemic or elections and similar events. The situation is that many things are called media and journalism today, and there is a general inability somehow to define what is media and what is journalism today, that we're struggling with also in policy terms in order to propose adequate measures to protect that kind of journalism that we want to see flourish. We are seeing in a lot of countries, we are of course focusing on Europe, but also beyond Europe, that because the entry barriers have been lowered down with these digital intermediaries, a lot of hyper-partisan, politicized, hyper-partisan and politicized outlets are flourishing in this environment. Because of this struggle somehow to find the economic or business model, a lot of media have turned to sensationalism or clickbait strategies, which has negative impact on their integrity and professional status, especially in terms of trust of their audiences. And of course, this aids disinformation disorder and negatively impacts already vulnerable reputation of journalism. And then on the other hand, when journalism is professional and quality, it is definitely the best antidote to disinformation. And considering the both, it's really strange that media and journalistic associations are not more prominent or not more prominently featured in the EU's policies against disinformation. And then another dimension that I want to briefly touch upon is the generative AI and journalism, to what extent this can be an opportunity for journalism, and to what extent is already showing as another layer of challenges and risks somehow, both to the very concept or definition of journalism, and then also the economic sustainability of journalism as we know it. What we've been seeing over the last year is a massive public uptake of generative AI. Of course, AI in general is relevant to observe in relation to journalism, but because of a little time we have here today, I decided to focus on generative AI because it has a very specific relation to journalism. So there's been a massive uptake of this technology. ChatGPT, for instance, reached 1 million users in only 5 days. This technology generates new content. We can also debate and discuss to what extent this content is really new or whether it resembles something that the training data contains. It's interesting because of its multimodality, the potential to transform text to audio and video and vice versa. It's still, however, a computer program that has no concept of facts or factuality. It basically works as statistical predictions, so estimating what the next word should be or could be based on, again, the training data. So because of all this, we've been observing and seeing a lot of hallucinations, a lot of mistakes that these models are generating and similar, which doesn't really help the situation with this information disorder that we're currently in. So the debate around the impact of generative AI relating to misinformation and disinformation is that it may grow quantity, quality, and personalization of disinformation and misinformation, which again, may amplify the challenge that we are already struggling to cope with. And then there is this can of course be an opportunity for journalism, because in this information disorder or information mess, it can provide a new space or more incentives for journalists to establish as voices of reference in this environment. On the other hand, there is this specific relationship between Gen AI and journalism, because these models are also being trained on journalistic content. We have very interesting cases of publishers, for instance, in the US, suing these companies, OpenAI as the most prominent one in this area, because they've been using their content without their approval. So in a way, they are producing services or are producing products that will in the end compete with those publishers. So the question here is the fair use and fair remuneration for publishers if their content is being used to train these models. On the other hand, in Europe, we are seeing that publishers are making deals with these tech companies, which can be good for the profession in a sense that if they are trying to not to repeat some of the mistakes they've done with platforms and are trying to be somehow more proactive in the process of establishing themselves as relevant players and kind of benefiting from the fact that they can provide quality content that these models can be trained on. But again, if these negotiations and if the deals are taking place behind the closed doors, and if we're speaking of major publishers here, what they negotiate somehow will have an impact on the potentials of smaller publishers in smaller countries. So it's very important that these processes are somehow coordinated among publishers, and that there is more transparency and more safeguards somehow in this process. And very briefly, towards the end, mentioning or looking towards the future of journalism, but going back from technology to humans, what we're seeing when we are observing trends regarding habits of young audiences is that youth, meaning those age groups between 15 and 24, who will determine the future of journalism, are increasingly departing or are being detached from the traditional notion of journalism and traditional news brands. They don't feel represented and listened to, and so they look for their information elsewhere. We lack this kind of research in Europe, but for instance, in the US, the shift of young audiences or of young people towards the influential individuals online for their news diet is significant. These young people predominantly use social media and their algorithmic recommendation systems for engaging and interacting with news. So again, the important role of platforms in this process. And they are shifting from, let's say, the first generation of big platforms such as Facebook, which was the most popular one, towards more visual and dynamic platforms such as TikTok. So for them, TikTok is the main platform currently in use. And so this is about audiences of news. But if we want to have quality journalism for future, we cannot rely on artificial intelligence. We still need to have humans. We need to have talent in journalism that is willing to not only join journalism, but stay in journalism. And this is becoming really, really difficult and challenging to ensure. So what we're observing from feedback that we're receiving from people that we interact with researchers from various EU countries, but perhaps or probably the situation is similar also beyond Europe, is that there is a very weak motivation for young people, even those studying journalism, to join and remain in the profession. And there are various reasons for this. One is of course, poor working conditions. So what we've been seeing from the Media Pluralism Monitor is that the working conditions, meaning salaries and contracts, have been deteriorating throughout for years. So there is no improvement on that front. And the other aspects that come somehow hand in hand with this is the safety situation that unfortunately has also been worsening for journalists, including in the EU. So over the past 7 years, we have several killings of journalists in the EU, not because they were reporting from war zones, but because they were unveiling corruption at the highest levels in their countries. So for young people, seeing this together with poor working conditions, they see other areas of creative industries related to technologies more lucrative or maybe more promising than joining and staying in journalism. And for future of journalism, this is really a big issue that we believe is not being addressed enough. And then, of course, the generational gap, for instance, when we speak about influencers, I don't know if you can see this visualization very well, but basically what it shows us is that young people are following influencers in enormous numbers. So almost 80% of them are following influencers on social media channels on a regular basis, while with older generations, this is definitely not the case. And then why or for what reasons are they following these influencers is what comes on the top is commentary on current events. So they are really stepping into this public arena as important voices, if you want, in interpreting the reality, if nothing else. But again, we see differences in use between different age groups, which is an interesting indicator for observing how the information system is evolving. And just a few words at the very end, because I want to end on a positive note, is that at least some of these issues are being acknowledged and are being dealt with at the policy level. So since a couple of years, we have EU copyright directive here in Europe that contains so-called publishers' right, that was designed somehow to allow publishers, together with journalists. This was added a little bit later, and it's still not clear whether it fully works in practice, but it should also work for journalists to allow them to negotiate better with platforms when platforms are using their content, so to give something also in return. Since recently have the European Media Freedom Act, which is a groundbreaking EU law that acknowledges that some of the problems and risks are systemic and they are shared, which makes them an EU problem and not the member state issue. Well, both, but there is now, at least we have this instrument that can step in if the measures at the member state level are not fit to purpose. And here I'm referring to the Article 18, which deals with content of media service providers or very large online platforms that Elda will say a few more words about. But this law also contains safeguards for independence of public service media, measures to improve editorial autonomy, transparency of media ownership. So it's trying somehow to deal with both the old risks that the media freedom has been facing with and some of the new challenges, such as the media freedom in the realm of digital platforms. And the Digital Services Act that requires those major online platforms and search engines to regularly assess their systems, their products somehow for so-called systemic risks. And one of these risks being the threats somehow, or risks that the use or the design of these systems can pose on media freedom and pluralism. So the fact, of course, this will be very difficult to do, and we will need to rely probably to some extent on the interpretation of platforms, how they see what media freedom and media pluralism is, but with adequate oversight, this can be a significant step forward to protecting media freedom also in this realm. And I will now stop here and move on to my colleague, Roberta Carlini. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you everybody for being here. Thank you, Eva, for organizing this event. I will follow the my colleague's opening. My presentation will focus on media ownership, and the title is quite what can I say, strong. I know the rise of media oligarchs. I will explain why I use this definition of media oligarchs. Starting with the main issue, I present myself. I studied the risks to media for the Media Pluralism Monitor. I studied the risks to media pluralism related to the market, the economic dimension. So I will start with the economic fragility of the media, but I will be very, very quick on this because it is unfortunately a well-known situation. And how this increments. No. Again, okay. Okay, how this situation increases the trends toward concentration of media ownership on the two sides of the media services providers and of the digital intermediaries to the news. And also, and then I will focus on who is buying the media and why, and the growing issue of mixed interest between the media business and other and non-media businesses in the same conglomerate or company. Why we speak of oligarchs, of course, premise, not all the media owners, even if concentrated and big, are oligarchs, and not all the oligarchs are media owners. But there is this growing phenomenon that I will try to explain. And then I will use some of the results of the MPM to show the impact of this situation of editorial independence. And then following the invitation that Eva gave us to also to speak of the future, what can be done, I will touch upon the remedies that are proposed, that are set in the new law on the media in the European Union, and also the remedies that could be taken into consideration. Why don't we see the graphs? Okay. The economic trends in the first graph on the left, we see very good news on the blue line and not so good news on the other lines, and very bad news on the green lines. The green lines is the one showing the advertising revenue that goes to the newspapers, that are the media sector that traditionally offered the most of the investigative journalism. And the blue line is the advertising spending, the digital advertising that, of course, has been growing for in accelerated rhythm in the last 10 years. And for the newspapers, we have a decrease in these 13 years by more than 60%. Same for the magazines. Television is a bit it's a bit better, but you have also to consider that a stable situation, a stationary situation, particularly in the last 2-3 years, is a negative situation, because these are in absolute values, and there has been a high rate of inflation in the UA, in the EU. So the decrease, the increase of digital advertising is cannot even be compared with the other sectors. Of course, in this internet line, there is everything. There are also the digital revenues that actually go to media, but these are a very, very small part of the revenues. In this small square in this graph, you see that in the European Media Industry Outlook that the European Commission released last year, it has been calculated in a very rough way, because we don't have data on the European market of media, but in a very rough way, it has been calculated the amount of digital revenues from digital advertising collected by Google and Meta, and this is compared with the amount of the overall revenues of the leading European media companies. And the leading European companies' total revenues are 65% of the advertising revenues of just 2 companies, that are Google and Meta, that of course they don't produce media content, but they are the gateway to the necessary gateway to news. The consequence has been a very sharp decrease in employment in the news media. Today we celebrate the news media, the World Freedom Press. Without journalists, it can be, but it's a bit difficult to have professional information. The professionals, the decrease has been very strong. Again, mainly for newspapers and also for radio, newspapers, news agencies. These numbers include everything, not just the journalists, because again, there is a dramatic lack of data on at European Union level. So we don't have, also because of the different definition of journalists in each country, we don't have accurate statistic on journalists, but we can see the employment in the sector. So including also their professionals working in the sector. I gave the trends of advertising decreasing, and here we have to add that in parallel also revenues from circulation decreased. because of the impact of the of the abundance of news in the digital environment that reduced the sales of newspapers in 5 years, minus 23%. But this came after a long-lasting decrease. These trends should be framed in a broader scenario. Of course, the digital transformation impacted all the content in all the industry that produces content, but there is a specificity, music, cinema, books, but there is a specificity of the news media sector that is an economic and a socio-political specificity. From the economic point of view, this is very well known in the literature that before the digital the technological development, there has been another technological development in the last century that so that the media industry is characterized by tendency to concentration because of the high fixed costs and low variable costs, and the structure of the market. And also the socio-political impact of the concentration is something that goes beyond the threats that concentration can pose to well-functioning of the markets, the competition as a principle of a free market, because in this case, concentration of market is also concentration of power, and also so a risk for external pluralism and diversity. Both these dimensions, economic and socio-political, have been impacted by digital transformation, with on one hand, the tendency to consolidation being explained and justified by the need to survive in the new environment. And from the other side, a new concentration of the digital intermediaries to the news characterized the media sector, and also in a circular, in a vicious or virtuous circle, I don't know, it weakens the, in some way, it weakens the concerns about the concentration of the providers, because there is this, there has been in the beginning of the internet era, this idea, we have it is not worrisome, too much concentration, because in the internet you find everything everywhere in each moment. I won't go inside this debate, but this is very, very important and has been, how can I say, debated, of course. The results of the Media Pluralism Monitor, as a consequence, we, in our exercise, we measure the concentration of the production side, the media providers, and of the intermediation side of the digital markets. And the risks are both at a very high level, very red, 80% in the media and 82% in digital markets, that is the platforms. These numbers are provisional because these are the results of the new NPM, and they are not still completely validated and published, but it is, I offer there to this discussion. In this was for the assessment of the risks, but who is buying the media? This new wave of concentration in the media industry raises a dilemma. Should we relax the anti-concentration rules in order to allow the media providers to improve the media economic sustainability? This is what in some way it's happening in some cases. The competition of the media authorities, when they have a separate assessment, move in Europe in randomly, but in many cases, concentration have been allowed in order to taking into consideration the new digital environment. And the dilemma also characterized the debate on the Article 22 of the European Media Freedom Act, which poses among the criteria to be considered when assessing a media market concentration, whether in absence of media market concentration, the parties involved would remain economic sustainable. That is something that in competition cases, it's normal in some way, but it is strengthened in this article. But I want to, there is a parallel phenomenon that is less considered in my opinion, that is not just the consolidation justified by the digital competition and the need to survive, but the fact that the economic fragility of the media increased the risk of the undue influence by political and economic actors. Why there is this wave of acquisition of the media that is not a profitable industry anymore? Recent cases show that there have been cases, there are countries in which there are media owners that are present in a lot of different business sector, and they are mainly investing furthermore in the media. Last year, the acquisition of the Vivendi Group on Lagardère has been authorized by the European Commission. Following this, this follows a wave of mergers, for example, in France, in which many media owners are active in industries that are often related to highly regulated or related to public expenditure. So not there is not a situation of the state controlling the media, but of the state, but of the industry controlling the media, but also dependent or in some way intertwined with the state. And in Italy, Italy has been the case in which in some way everything started with a well-known duopoly in the monopoly in the television sector, but in the recent process of a consolidation, the newspaper and radio sector is dominated by a group that is that was the first automotive producer in Italy, and this increased the problem of the lack of an effective law of conflict of interests. But there are also recent, more, how can I say, smaller situations that go under the radar, that is private health businesses controlling newspaper. So, and now maybe in this group is going to acquire, to buy the second press agency of the country. Regional newspapers that are controlled by regional industries, again, not pure publisher. There has been a recent cases that I think it's important because it's small, but it is symbolic because it is the one of the first Italian newspapers, local newspapers, the Genoa newspaper that has been bought by a shipping company whose main locations, whose main site is the port of Genoa, that is the city of the newspaper. Recent cases in the UK in which the government step in with a law, the parliament step in with a new legislation to stop the takeover of the Telegraph by the Redbird IMI by a company owned by a foreign state. Not to mention the well-known cases of Poland and Hungary with the conglomerate Orlen. Polska, we are, okay. If we define the oligarchs, I'm using the definition of this recent book that is very interesting, as someone who secures and reproduces wealth or power, then transforms one into the other. In this process of transformation, media are, can be a relevant tool. This is why I use the term oligarchs, and there is literature speaking of a new wave of oligarchization in European media, and the economic weakness of the media, of the journalists, exposes the newsrooms. I will skip on this slide because Eva already showed you that the consequence is an impact on this indicator of the NPM, which shows not in general the editorial independence, that is also from political actors, but specifically editorial independence from commercial and other influence. And it has never been a nice situation, but it increased into the field of high risk in this year, starting, for example, from 60% in 2020. In the recent edition, we added a variable exactly to ask in how many countries there are poor publishers that don't have non-media businesses, and we have low risk, so no cases of overlapping of different interests, just in 4 countries, medium risk in 10 cases. So the media, I don't know, I should talk of the remedies now, but maybe I used all my time, so maybe I can stop here, describe the situation, but and leave this part. There are two or three slides to the discussion, if you prefer.
I actually wanted to suggest that if now we take a small break for the audience to see if there are any questions, reflection to this, this is a very valuable one. So I think if you're interested in looking a little bit into the remedies, I think we can dedicate some time to this now, right? 5 minutes will not kill us.
Thank you. I will first speak of the remedies that are set by the law that has been recently published, the European Media Freedom Act. 25 years after the first attempt to curb the power of media conglomerates, and in a completely different situation, because at the time the problem was the audiovisual, no? The European Union approved this law. In which sense this law intervenes in the issues that I mentioned since now, setting rules for disclosure, transparency, thinking that transparency we can start with transparency. So among the duties of the media service providers, there is the duty to ensure that any actual or potential conflict of interest that might affect the provision of news and current affairs are disclosed. So there are not rules to curb, to prohibit this overlapping of interests, but people must know, the readers have to know that the media content owner, the media owner has also other relevant news interests. There is something more in the article that introduces a specific merger control for the media. Among the criteria to evaluate media concentration now, there is a specific procedure to evaluate media concentration that has not to be evaluated just on the basis of competition law, but adding a media pluralism test. Among the criteria to evaluate this concentration, there are, of course, the expected impact of the media market concentration on media pluralism, taking into account the online environment, and the parties' interest in or link to or activities on other media or non-media businesses. So the Commission and the board will write the guidelines to better define this part, but this is a way in which consideration of the lack of editorial independence, economic pressure on journalists can be taken into consideration in order to decide if a merger has to be approved or not. Of course, it's important also the role of self-regulation and professionalism that is not the same in all the countries. And here the European Union Directive of 2022 approved together with the proposal of the Media Freedom Act encourages self-regulatory safeguards that are quite present in there is like this catalog of best practices, and also in the Media Pluralism Monitor, we see that in more countries, particularly in that countries that historically have a high professionalism, these remedies are in force, but there are increasingly challenged by the deterioration of the working condition of journalists. I would like also to expose 3 other proposals that can be taken into consideration. One is an old one that was proposed by Edwin Becker in this book on why media ownership matters. That is an ideal media merger policy, he wrote, could have 2 elements. The first one, media entities can be sold only to individual or entities that after the sale will own no more media property that the seller previously owned. That means any merger shouldn't increase the concentration of the sector. And maybe this is a bit utopistic. The second one is less utopistic, that is any for-profit commercial entity that purchases a media must, after the purchase, be primarily on media business. That is something that can be taken into consideration in media mergers evaluation. Why not? If media need to consolidate to defend their autonomy, so let's defend their autonomy and so they avoid other sectors entering in the media. But also another proposal in the same book by Becker was giving the journalists the right to vote for the mergers, to have a say, to have a word in to approve or not approve the merger, or, and this is something that is provided in the EMFA, subordinate the merger to guarantees of editorial independence. Other proposals can also be using the public funds of media, not just to sustain the existing media, but to foster media plurality and diversity. And using the other tools like Digital Market Act, the Copyright Law, Digital Service Act, the press code, the codes that are approved in many countries with obligation to negotiate for the platform to ensuring pluralism exposure together with pluralism of media ownership. Thank you, and sorry for being a bit
Okay, please don't rely on me to save time. Disclaimer. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Eva, for organizing this event. From the length of the presentations, from all the list of topics that we have so far touched upon, I think that we can say that in this, let's say, 12 years of the CMPF, we have done a lot in unpacking all the issues and the problems.
You need to move to this one because we don't see you online.
Okay, I'll move the chair. Yes, to unpack most of the issues, I mean, and to delve into the main topics that compose this complex patchwork of media policy and ways to safeguard media pluralism in Europe, but not only in Europe. And we witnessed that in these 12 years of CMPF how things have changed. I mean, when we started, somehow the situation was relatively easier to analyze and assess. And we had to face a very fast change in the technological environment that is now bringing on the table many other issues to deal with when we have in mind the final goal to produce, I mean, to have an information environment that is sound and is not a problem, let's say, for our democratic society. And today I will speak about information integrity and digital regulation. Why? Because keeping information integral, it's a very hard business nowadays with the flourishing of social media, with the spread of user-generated content that is not always, as was already said, contributing to pluralism. Instead, is producing disinformation. And somehow here I try to synthesize the works that we have done both within the Media Pluralism Monitor analysis and in the European Digital Media Observatory work on disinformation indeed, and focusing mostly on regulation, how to tackle these problems using regulation, and what are the challenges in this regard. So since we are today celebrating the UN World Press Freedom Day, instead of starting from the approach that the European Union is providing to this issue, I tried to focus on what the UN is doing. When we check the UN Sustainable Development Goals, we find Goal 16 promotes just, peaceful and inclusive society, and 1610, the sub-goal, let's say, ensure public access to information and protect fundamental freedoms in accordance with national legislation and international agreements. So the goal to ensure access to information and protect fundamental freedom declined in the new information ecosystem is also to support and ensure information integrity. What is information integrity? It refers to the accuracy, consistency, reliability of information, and information integrity is threatened by disinformation, misinformation, and hate speech. This is the definition, somehow, the specification given by the UN Secretary General in 2023 in a report on information integrity on digital platforms. So there is also a strategy at UN level in order to tackle disinformation, and in particular disinformation online. So what is disinformation online? It's a problem with a complexity that challenges the nature of regulating and regulation. First, I mean, from a legal perspective, it's very difficult to tackle this phenomenon that is variously defined and is defined by UN documents, by Council of Europe documents, is defined by the documents of the European Union, but in general is a threat. We were discussing before that today there is an entire dossier of The Economist on this issue. when it comes to analyzing the diet of the users of the internet and how they inform themselves, and how this the way they inform themselves, if they are informed through channels of misinformation or disinformation, can have some effects also on the democratic debate and on democracy in the end. It's a threat of democracy, not only. It affects various actors with different levels of agency, awareness, and intention. And the very problematic issue with disinformation is that sometimes it could be considered illegal. Sometimes it cannot be considered as such, but its massive distribution can in the end be a threat, a risk for the democratic debate, for some society good, and can be harmful for society at large. So the main issue in terms of regulation is indeed when regulation should step in and decide to intervene when disinformation is not illegal, but it's harmful for the society. Disinformation online is a multidimensional problem. It's legal, but it's also a political, economic, and social issue. When we have analyzed the phenomenon of disinformation, of course, we focus very much on the economic element that is linked with this phenomenon, not only the social one. I mean, disinformation many times is it's for gain, I mean, for an economic gain. It's a moving target, so it's very difficult to grasp a specific phenomenon that amounts to disinformation, also because the technology produces at a very fast pace new ways of distributing disinformation. It's not a national challenge, it's a transnational challenge. So in terms of regulation, requires efforts that are not national. Actually, national responses in terms of legal responses are usually poor and cannot stand the power also that these platforms have in the international arena. And definitely needs comprehensive solution, and the mere legal perspective cannot be enough to tackle all the whole problem that is very complex and multifaceted. And here to recap, what is the European approach to disinformation that is seen as one of the most advanced approaches to tackle the phenomenon. First of all, there is a regulatory response, something that can be questioned as such, because there are different constitutional approaches to the phenomenon. And if we look at what happens in the US, for instance, disinformation somehow it's not a big deal as far as it can be considered as part of the marketplace of ideas. The code of practice on disinformation is a self-regulatory code that was put in place by the European Union it's a self-regulatory instrument to define some commitments to, ask the various stakeholders, not only the very large online platforms, but advertisers, fact checkers, civil society organizations, to decide to agree on some commitments and asking for good practices that should limit the spread of disinformation, to limit the dissemination of certain content, to demonetize the disinformation, to have more transparency, and to some extent to have more visibility of trustworthy content. It is conceived as a code, a multi-stakeholder code, where everyone has some kind of role, including fact checkers, including research institutions, including civil society. It aims at strengthening media literacy, access to data. But indeed, it's an instrument that needs to be implemented, somehow is demanding when it comes to its implementation. And in order to be assessed and to see whether it worked properly as an element to limit the spread of disinformation, it needs also a very careful monitoring, on the one hand, of what the platforms, how the platforms have performed, and how the phenomenon of disinformation has been limited by the implementation of the code itself. Moreover, somehow following also the experience of such types of codes, like the Code of Practice of Disinformation, the European Union has approved the Digital Services Act in 2022. And when it comes to disinformation and very large online platforms and very large search engines, we have to mention the Article 34 and Article 35 of the Digital Services Act, that are those articles that deal with the assessment of systemic risks stemming from the design or functioning of very large online platforms and very large search engines services, and how the platform can limit the risks stemming from their services, risks that can affect many things, including freedom of expression and information, freedom and pluralism of the media, and can have negative effect of civic discourse and electoral process and public security. So here, based on the interpretation of the act, the risks that are involved, that are behind, somehow this Article 34 are those linked mostly to disinformation online that can have detrimental effects on various fundamental rights and principles of a democratic, that are the basis of a democratic society. So what are the measures that the platforms should put in place? Provided very large online platforms put in place reasonable, proportionate, and effective mitigation measures tailored to the specific systemic risk, with particular consideration of the impact of such measures on fundamental rights. So they have to put in place some countermeasures, or in general, they have to be aware of the problem and try to mitigate the risks stemming from their services. What else is asked to the platforms under the Digital Services Act. The platforms should provide access to their data to vetted researchers in order to to allow researchers to understand how they somehow performed, how they complied with the DSA itself, or in general to research on the topics that can be relevant in order to understand their behavior. And one of the measures that can be considered as a mitigation measure is to subscribe to sign codes of conduct. And following a code of conduct can be an element to mitigate one of the risks that were mentioned in Article 34 of the DSA. So here we have a picture in which a problem of disinformation is tackled through the activity and the due diligence somehow of the online platforms. So the DSA bets on the behavior of the online platforms in order to limit this phenomenon. Of course, this is to some extent a good choice, also because there are no alternatives, I must say. But we have in our perspective, we have to think also of the role of the media in this picture. We are now celebrating the World Press Freedom Day. Where is the media in this picture? We have to remind ourselves that media is the fourth power. I mean, we have conceived our democracies so far, putting a lot of importance betting on the role of the media. Using the media as the watchdogs, thinking of the media as the watchdogs for the power, and integral part of our forms of governance, state and of governance. So what is the role of the media within this picture? I always used to think of a democratic society that is reliant only on content moderation, mostly of user-generated content, to convince myself that we cannot imagine, even in the future, even in this technological society, we cannot imagine a democratic society that strives, that works with no media. It's somehow a dystopic image. So we already saw that technology has changed very much the media environment, and we can use again the NPM analysis to demonstrate this. I just list advancement in information communication technologies, very large online platform that change media audience behaviors and business models, as was said, the fact that there is an indirect access to media. There is that the recent crisis have brought a rapid transformation towards digital, mobile, and platform-centric media landscapes that affects the business models and formats within journalism, as it was said before. We face the phenomenon of news avoidance, continuous decline in the traditional advertising-based revenue models, personalization of news and advertising, limited willingness to pay for news, artificial intelligence, and automation of the news. And this reflects our results for the NPM. We see that there are poor working condition for journalists, high media ownership concentration, weakening of the legacy media, reduced plurality of media providers, low media and digital literacy, and disinformation. And since there is no time, I would like to stress somehow the positive that I see, somehow the other part of the coin, the other side of the coin in the European regulation. For instance, the European Media Freedom Act, that was somehow heavily influenced, if I may say it, by the results of our MPM, and that tries to tackle all the challenges that the media are facing nowadays. And for instance, the challenge they have with platforms. I mean, in the fact that platforms should, Article 18 of the European Media Freedom Act should somehow devote a special regard, I mean, to the media before moderating media content. It was already mentioned. So far from perfect, this criteria defines once again that we have somehow to bet also on those operators of the information that bear the editorial responsibility for the content they produce in an online environment that otherwise relies too much on the role of very large online platforms in content moderation and in mitigation measures. And this brings me also to some questions. Of course, I just want to highlight that what the DSA foresees is mitigation measures for in order to limit the risks for the media pluralism and media freedom. And is mitigation measures enough? Are we saying that we are enough, that we are fine with an environment, an information environment that just is happy to mitigate a risk without achieving a specific goal? I would like to stress once again that media is a fundamental stakeholder. We cannot consider it just another producer of fake news, but we have to foster, and in this regard, the European Media Freedom Act tries to work in this direction. We have to foster the dialogue between the very large online platforms and the media, also because in what I say, the crowded code of practice on disinformation, the representative of the media are missing. So we have to work in this sense for a dialogue between platforms and the media, and work a lot on the main underlying problem, that is the business model for the new information ecosystem and the dependency of media from platform distribution. Somehow it was already mentioned. Just to recap, there is still a role for the media. We have to invest in new business models, PSM, media literacy, maybe think of a more structured intervention on platforms, monitoring the effects of content moderation, support quality journalism, and have a real multi-stakeholder approach in platform co-regulation. And having in mind that with just a measure, it's not possible nowadays to tackle the whole problem of disinformation online, and we definitely need a holistic approach. Thank you for the attention.
So hi everyone, I'm Urbano Reviglio, a researcher here at the SMPF. I want to thank you again, Eva, for this very interesting seminar, but given time constraint, I will be very as fast as possible, of course. So today I'm presenting the state of the art of local media in Europe, in particular the project Local Media for Democracy, its results, and providing a glimpse into future research. But before embarking into this rapid helicopter view, let me say that local media is fundamental for democracy, of course, not only because it is able to, given its proximity with the audiences, to create a stronger connection and gaining trust of its audiences, and also because it covers underrepresented issues in national outlets. It is fundamental for at least two reasons. First, it makes people more resilient to disinformation, that we know that nowadays this is very significant. And secondly, they're also able to raise awareness on environmental issues in a much more impactful way than national media. We have indications of this. And so also let me remind that today's World Press Freedom theme is about journalism in the face of environmental crisis. So it is very important to remind this that local media is truly essential for democracy. Having said this, let me present this pilot project called Local Media for Democracy that we've worked on for the last year, and it analyzed the status of local and community media across the 27 European Union member states, signaling the areas that are at risk of news deserts. What are news deserts? The name is quite self-explanatory. They refer to areas in which there is no news, basically. And it is a phenomenon that has emerged in the United States, and it has been studied in the last 2 decades. Because in the United States, there are indeed areas in which there is no newspapers at all, and in some cases, only one newspaper. Of course, European Union is a much different context for at least two reasons. First, public service media is much stronger in Europe, and it covers local issues. And on the other hand, population density is also very different. It's a quarter in the United States compared to Europe. And so, of course, there are areas that can be much more sensitive, more prone to the risks of news deserts. So we have reinterpreted the concept in a broader way, and we define it as a geographic or administrative area or a social community where it is difficult or impossible to access sufficient, reliable, diverse information from independent local, regional, and community media. So this broad definition actually captures the decline and crisis of local media. And so we've recently published this report that is more than 300 pages, and it contains 27 different specific member states reports. And to do this, we have developed a methodology based on 55 variables, mirroring also the indicators that are developed in the Media Pluralism Monitor, that are basically 5. The infrastructure of local media, market, safety of local journalists, editorial independence, and social inclusiveness. The challenges we faced were several. Of course, there is very limited research of this topic in the European context. Local and community media are defined and conceived very differently across Europe. There is a lack of data, especially financial and audience data. And of course, there is a very different socio-political context across Europe, and so it was very hard to find a comprehensive assessment of this phenomenon. The general main findings are basically that in the northern countries, there is less of a risk of news deserts, whereas in the Eastern European part, the southern and also a bit the central European one, there is more risk of news deserts. Interestingly, sometimes there are present news deserts even in cities, capital cities, such as in Riga or Dublin. And it is also important to stress that in some countries that score quite good, like Denmark and Austria, our country teams that we had across all the European member states argued that there is a risk ahead, and so we need to prevent this from happening even in countries that are better positioned. So rapidly, the infrastructure of local media across Europe of course, shows a lack of news offer in rural areas, which compose more than 80% of the European soil. So, of course, it is very relevant. There is also a centralization of newsrooms, and this is pretty much related to the phenomenon of desk journalism. That is that many journalists write about local issues, but from their desk, not in the spot. And finally, a declining number of journalists, which is clearly related to this issue. Looking at the map, we can see that the situation is quite heterogeneous, and we have basically two outliers, Czech Republic with a high risk, the highest risk, and Austria, which instead proves to have a good infrastructure for local media. As for market, which is an indicator that assesses the economic conditions, viability, and sustainability for local and community media, the main issues are, again, declining revenues, reluctance to pay for local news, and this is, of course, related to somewhat the internet usage and news consumption that has somewhat deceived people that they can have news for free, quality news for free, and this is not the case. And we're learning this lesson very hardly. So ownership concentration, lack of innovation funding, and limited financial support for community media. By looking at the map, again, we can see it standing out, Czech Republic as one of the countries with the highest risk, but also Eastern European countries are particularly at risk, of course, for historical reasons too. As for the safety of local journalists, unsurprisingly, the main issues are low salaries, unstable working conditions, and also an increase of online threats, especially of female journalists. Looking at the map, this is a bit less heterogeneous. We can see that northern countries, Germany, Denmark, and Belgium, but also Portugal score pretty well, whereas in particular Greece, Croatia, and again Czech Republic, but also Hungary, they score quite high. Looking at the editorial independence indicator, we can see that the main issues are similar to the one that you can observe also in a national context. So there is the risk of unfair and non-transparent distribution of state advertising, the risk of political capture, even over municipal outlets, and also a lack of political independence of public service media in local branches. Looking at the map, we can see two outliers, and one is Poland with the highest risk score, and this is followed also by many Eastern and Southern European countries, whereas again, Germany and Denmark score well. Finally, social inclusiveness is the indicator that assesses news offer for and about minorities and marginalized communities, and the main issues related to these are a lack of prominent media covering these communities, and sometimes there are even negative representation of such minorities. And local media often does not report on public interest news. This is one of the highest score. As you can see from the map, it is pretty much heterogeneous, the risk. Finally, we also investigated best practices intended as those innovative practices that enhance an open and thriving public sphere in specific communities. And so we have observed interesting trends despite the challenges of collecting reliable data. In terms of news formats, we have observed that email newsletters and podcasts are formats that are being experimented effectively by local news media. And these, and indeed, there are investments for these formats predicted by investors. And we have interpreted this demand by the audiences, local audiences, in terms of the fact that people want to have a deeper relationship with news consumption that is somewhat detached from the attention-grabbing digital environments. And so having newsletters regularly about certain topics, listening to podcasts for half an hour or an hour, is definitely a way that can help people to actually deepen the topics. In terms of sustainability, we also observe that public interest activities, they can better route local news media in communities, but also transnational networking and cooperation. It is very important nowadays because thanks to the internet, one can benefit from this. Two examples are the International Newspaper Association, the Street Newspaper Association that helps street newspapers that are non-profit and very much rooted in communities to scale and start up. Another example is the International Network of Whistleblowing, which offers platforms for free in which people can signal eventual crimes or important information. And then we also observe the ambivalent role of digital media, which is something that would require further investigation, because of course, on the one hand, the digital media provides low-cost news production and dissemination, but on the other hand, one of the main threats is, of course, the dependence, the threatening of editorial independence due to the attempt to follow the algorithm's logic to gain visibility. And so we're still somewhat interpreting these data that we have collected. There's still a lot of research ahead. And so we are now highlighting in a forthcoming article with my colleagues Jan Kermer and Kiana Blagojev, correlations related to the risk of new desert. So we are testing a number of hypotheses and discussing them. For example, the relationship between the quality of public service media and the risks of news desertification, but also the prevalence of social media usage and risk desertification, and the disinformation risk and the risk of news desertification. So far, we can see that there is a very strong correlation for what concerns public service media quality. This is a proxy indicator that we have elaborated through the NPM. So we have cross-analyzed the data of local media for democracy with the Media Pluralism Monitor. And so we have shown that there is indeed this strong correlation that would require further investigation. Interestingly also, regarding social media usage, we can see a negative correlation. And this shows, in fact, that social media can also have a positive effect on lowering the risk of news deserts, but still, this might actually point out the fact that certain countries with more developed media environments have a higher usage. And in fact, when we go when we test hypotheses that is more granular, for example, the news consumption on Facebook, we can find a very strong correlation between the risk of news deserts and the usage of Facebook for news consumption. And so this, of course, would require further investigation, because the role of platforms like Facebook in the last 15 years has been certainly very much influential, especially for the advertisement business. And finally, for the disinformation risk, we do not find any particular correlation. And this points out to the fact that Elda was saying before, that disinformation is a multidimensional phenomenon and cannot be explained so easily. So this is a general overview of local media in Europe nowadays. I hope that we have some time to discuss it further. Thank you.
Okay, well, let's discuss a little bit about the monitoring. I've been thinking after ENFA had a specific article about monitoring. So I've been thinking about how the Media Pluralism Monitor is already answering to this request by ENFA. The article is Article 26, as you know, and I will not discuss the methodological part of the article, in which the Commission in paragraph 2 says that we will need to have a monitoring exercise in which there is the definition of key performance indicators, a methodological safeguard, and a criteria for selecting researchers. These are, in my opinion, methodological issues. One of them, the key performance indicator, is very important. I have some ideas, but I will not discuss it today. What I will discuss it today instead is the content of the request that is in the third paragraph of the Commission. This doesn't move? No. Yeah. No, okay. No.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, yes. Okay. Now, ENFA in Article 26, as I say in paragraph 3, says essentially five things about what they want to be measured, okay, to monitored. One is media, a detailed analysis of media markets, including media concentration and the risk of foreign manipulation. We will see, what I will do is to list these things and then look at what the monitor is already doing and what is less doing, okay? But it's immediately clear that foreign manipulation is not been in the focus of the monitor when we built it in the past 10 years, okay? While media concentration is obviously one of the key points of the monitor. The second element is an overview and forward-looking assessment of the functioning of media markets. So the first part is a detailed analysis of the media market, and the second is asking for a forward-looking assessment of the functioning, including as regards the impact of online platforms. And this is very interesting because it is at the core of the evolution of the monitor we had in the past few years, particularly in 2020 when we changed the monitor to be updated to the platforms. But I think that there are new things that we should add, and also Ivar talked today about the influence of platforms on editorial independence. Seems to me that opens a way to think to a third dimension, because we have already the political influence on editorial independence, the commercial influence on editorial independence, and probably we could also, at this point, we are ready to look directly to the platform's influence on editorial independence. So this is something we can add here. Then there is overview of risk to media pluralism and editorial independence of media service providers. And this, as I said, risk to media pluralism and editorial independence is the core of the monitor, really. But with probably this addition about platform that we have to think about. Then the fourth element is overview of measures taken by media services to guarantee the independence of editorial decisions. This is something we already do, in a sense, look into how organized media and how they are not influenced, or how much they risk the influence of commercial interest. But maybe here there is something more in these measures taken that is asking us to look into how probably we have already done this historically, but maybe what this is a request of looking into the way in which the media is organized more than we have done in the past, probably. Consider that this request of monitoring at the end of the ENFA after the 25 articles that try to change things, okay? And I'll come to this in a second. And finally, overview of framework and practice for allocation of public funds for state advertising. There is this strong focus on state advertising. We know, and we have known this for many years, that this is an important topic, especially in certain countries, probably not in all countries, but maybe if the ENFA is foreseen in the future, it could become more important in the future somehow. Not state advertising, but definitely state money. If the crisis of the legacy media continues the way in which we are seeing. So let me, I don't spend time on how the monitor is done, just to say that we have done this in a specific structured way. And then I move to this, what in the four areas we already do, okay? Definitely, we assess the essential condition for a pluralistic democratic media system. So the first question about how the media system works, definitely we address in fundamental protection, okay? Then there is the question of concentration in market plurality. Definitely we work on concentration on media ownership and already on dominance and regulation of online platforms. But maybe, as I said, there is something more that is required by ENFA. Then there is commercial influence over newsroom, and this is already in our monitor. Okay, so certain things are already there, and we are already doing them. In political independence, definitely we do the politicization media system. That is one of the questions that are indicated. And we work on editorial autonomy and the fairness of state support. So we already have this state advertising story, even in a larger subsidy way. So we have to understand if what we are already doing is sufficient or if the ENFA is asking something more. Finally, and this is, as I mentioned at the beginning, probably the one in which we have less, there is this question of foreign influence, let's put it this way. And there we have this analysis in social inclusiveness about hate speech and disinformation. So we already have introduced this information in the monitor, looking at it in terms of social, how the external influence, the foreign influence affects it, probably is an angle that is not well developed and we should develop more. So this is, I listed what the Article 26 is asking and what we already do. And there are 3 or 4 things that probably we can do better. But then let me finish quickly on a more general view of what ENFA means for the monitor that is connected to this, but a bit more specific. And is the question of the new European dimension of measuring media pluralism, okay, that ENFA is asking us. Okay, the first part is easy, is the easier part. Beside Article 26, or maybe reflected also in Article 26, there are a series of provisions in ENFA. You remember ENFA is a regulation, but is a principle regulation, because many things it says member states should do it, then shall do, okay? So it's not a detailed regulation. That means that there is the necessary calls for specific application. If it was a directive, we will say implementation, but it's very close by member states. So we are on this gray ground between rules and application of these rules, okay? In many articles, we require, therefore, for us, an evaluation of the response at the national level. I just mentioned here some of them, but there are many more probably. But independence of public media services, that's clearly something that will need to be examined at how ENFA will be applied country by country. Media and very large online platforms, as Elda was discussing, is something that probably will have national applications. ENFA is trying to create a safety net, but it will be important to see how it happens. Maybe it will be general, maybe it will be nation specific. I'm not sure about the end result of this, because this at least has the element that the platforms are global, so have an interest to behave always in the same way somehow for the business model. So here there is a force that counteract the localization of the issue, okay? Then there is the concentration evaluation, Article 22. There we'll see if members, their ENFA is very loose in the indication at the moment. So we have to see how the member state will react to this and what kind of public interest test or whatever it is, media plurality test they will create. They will be similar. In competition, now we have tests that are similar after many, many years and an evolution of decades of the jurisprudence, and then evolution of laws that somehow aligned. And then there is a European law that covers everything. But anyway, it's been an evolution. This evolution will be quick, I'm not so sure, so it is another element. And state advertising also is another element in which we will have to see how states will adapt to the ENFA indications. So the question is that probably here remains a space for what we were already doing, looking at media pluralism country by country, and then doing a comparative study, if you want, trying to look with the same lens to situations that, however, had national characteristics and national risks. In fact, were very different because of these different characteristics. So this is, how can I say, the easy part, okay? It's difficult, but probably is easier in a sense, because it's what we have already done many times, okay? That's what we do in the media pluralism monitor if we are trying to apply Article 26. Then arrives, and that's essentially my last slide, then arrives the other part. And it seems to me that is the true novelty, but I may be wrong, and that's why I want to discuss it. ENFA is a sort of, I say, safety net anyway, but is also a new standard, okay? We have used the European standard, Council of Europe, general treaties and so on as standard for our media pluralism. But now arrives a law, a European law, that we say is a principle regulation, but still is a regulation. It's telling us how should be media. Maybe it's not complete, obviously. There are pieces that it's not covering, but it's covering many things, okay? And it's telling us how media pluralism should work in Europe. This requires a new dimension of the way in which we do the media pluralism monitor, a European dimension. That is, there is a local part and then a European part of the monitor. That seems to me the real hard question for us now to decide how to move. Can and should we measure directly and independently if this new standard is applied? There will be two measurements, one for the European standard and one for the local laws or local constitutional protection and all the local laws and economic situation and so on. So you see, there are clearly issues that have one more local dimension and that will remain. But there is the serious question if we have to apply ENFA as a standard against which we measure countries independently from their own working. I'm not 100% sure that that's the right way to go, but the question we have to ask. And anyway, our comparative study is not anymore a comparison of member states with their own laws, media laws, but has to take into account that there is a European media law. However, as a corrective to this thing, I've been thinking there has been already some European laws. Clearly, the Audiovisual Media Service Directive is less important and more fragmented, much more fragmented, much more fundamental than ENFA. But there have been laws that have been more, if you want, pervasive. Think to net neutrality. Net neutrality, we were looking at the net neutrality, is obviously it's not the whole story of the media, but it's a piece. And we were looking at net neutrality issues before the net neutrality regulation. And then this kind of our looking into countries declined once countries adopted net neutrality. So the question is, could be that ENFA becomes only a general standard on at the end of our way to work, or will really, as it happened for net neutrality, for instance, that we accepted, okay, net neutrality is a European law, is there, we don't look too much in that, let's look at the risks that we see. That risk is not anymore there. But with ENFA, I think it's more difficult to do this because there are too many elements that are at the core of how media work, okay? So I think that that's what is the challenge. So in conclusion, I think that monitoring press freedom and measuring media plurality remains extremely important. But ENFA probably adds a further dimension, less in terms of new issues, because as I showed at the beginning, new issues are not many, really. There is some new issues for our monitor, but not much. But more in terms of adding this novel European dimension to the measurement. And so we will have to see if we'll have to update the media pluralism monitor to this new challenge. That's will be the work of the next months and years. Thank you.
Thank you, Pierluigi, very much. Thank you all. As you can see, we are out of time, basically. We underestimated the volume of topics that we're dealing with and challenges that are relevant in order to speak and think about press freedom, media pluralism, and journalism nowadays. So I think people in the room have a privilege of connecting with us and joining us for coffee or lunch and continuing discussing these topics after the seminar ends. So I would like to call those online to step in case you have any questions or comments based on what you've been listening for the past 2 hours. It would be great to hear from you and have your feedback. Maybe you also want to share some of your projects that you've been working on that have some touching points with the work we do here so that we can also connect and be in touch and exchange on these matters. Of course, the floor is also open in the room if you have some questions or comments. So here we see the comments. I don't see them here. Yes, I stopped sharing the screen. Okay, no, we are just receiving some connections. Yes. So the question is if we can share the slides, or we can think of a joint publication, so kind of a news bulletin or a blog post with the key points from this discussion, also linking to the presentations that we shared today so that it can be accessible to everyone. I think this is answer to Petra, who posed us the question in the chat. Yes, please.
Sorry, I realize I'm in the room, so I'll be very quick. I don't want to take up too much time. But thanks very much for a really fascinating seminar. It was really marvelous. And just a few points that occurred to me to ask about. One is regarding young people, that they're not being heard or whatever. But that sounds a little bit to me like whinging. Like when I was 15, I didn't worry. And I know times have changed, but why would you listen necessarily? Like they can read the New Statesman, the Spectator. Like it just seems to me a bit of a false point. Then with regard to the dramatic decline in the circulation of newspapers, which Roberta pointed to, that's very worrying. And also in one of Urbano's slides, he showed newsstands that they're starting to disappear. So that's really very regrettable. And I just wonder, frankly, is there anything can be done about that? And I just worry that no, there isn't. But my major point that just struck me was, and I'll end with this, that I happened to notice that in today's Financial Times, there's a full page advertisement for World Freedom Day by UNESCO. And also the SDG 16 was mentioned as well. SDG, the Sustainable Development Goal. But I'm just asking myself, where does China come into this, in the sense that we're having a discussion here, and quite rightly so, to be very worried about disinformation, to combat that. But, China, how extensive is press freedom in China, the world's, second economy or whatever, is so much incredibly important. And I just think that nobody ever seems to mention this. Like UNESCO is a UN body. The Sustainable Development Goals are for the whole membership of the UN. But what about press freedom in China? Don't they clamp down on it to a very huge extent? That's all I want to say. And thank you again for a really stimulating event.
Thank you very much. I think we can do a quick round addressing some of the points that you raised. I will just briefly address the first one on young people being heard. So why should we listen to them, or why they want to be heard? The times have changed indeed. So even for my generation, there were very few, there weren't any opportunities for us to speak. So when I was growing up in Croatia, which at the time was an independent state, we had only few channels. We had only few newspapers in the country. We didn't have platforms in which we could raise our voice. The situation with young people today is completely different. If you go on TikTok and if you scroll around, you will see so many young people, very young people, interested in global challenges, communicating about these global challenges, using statistics and data, framing them, interpreting them, and discussing these issues amongst themselves. So clearly they're using platforms to raise their voice, and they want their voice to be heard. They feel detached from traditional media structures because they don't see ways somehow to connect with those structures, and they don't feel that the experts who are invited to speak in the media necessarily speak to them or speak about the topics that they found relevant. And this is also part of the reason why they are departing from the traditional media. We can also see this in the political arena, for instance, where radical right groups are much more efficient in using these new technologies and new platforms to connect with young people who are a little bit lost and disappointed and afraid because of all these constant risks and challenges. And they are communicating better with them than other political options. And this is why we're also seeing sudden spike or rise in votes that young people are giving to these radical right, sometimes even extreme groups. So I think we shouldn't ignore this fact. I mean, the times have changed, and this is how it is. And this is the future audience for news and media. So if news and media are not finding way to communicate these with these young people, then really the question is, what's the future for them? Because they are now communicating amongst themselves and with influencers online. So those who are managing to position as influential voices in the spaces where these young people are and where they communicate. So I think from the point of view of thinking, reflecting about the future of journalism and media and authoritative sources of information in general, if you want, or relevant institutions in democracy, I think it's something that is really relevant to take into consideration. But there were other interesting questions also to Roberta and Urbano, and maybe also Elda and Pier Luigi want to reflect on the last part about China, which I think is very interesting, and I would like to continue on this one as well.
Regarding the decline in circulation and also the newsstands, the chart that I showed was about revenues from circulation. Of course, there has been an increasing in the digital circulation. It is not monetized. It is not enough monetized. So the decline in physical circulation brought to this decline in revenues. And maybe linking to what Eva was saying, there has been a perfect and tragic coincidence of this generational divide and the impact of the digitalization also on the business model, because on one hand, newspapers have been very, very low in the digital transition. On the other hand, for how much interest young people can have in news, they grew up in an environment in which news are free. Information is free, so it's very difficult to switch it to try a way to monetize, and a lot of people of newsrooms, of foundation, of association are trying to find a solution. For example, micropayments that now and then are they try and they fail. But also this, what I wanted to say to close on a positive remark is that I don't know if we can fully rely on this survey, but according to the Digital News Report, there is, of course, a much more strong dependency of the young people to the algorithmic selection, to the algorithmic information. But when asked about the willingness to pay for the news, the percentage is low, because it is low in general, but it is higher than for the for the average of the population. So if it is true, and this is for the country covered by the Digital News Report survey, that are 24 countries, not including China. If it is true, maybe the thing is not that they don't want, that they will never pay for information, but that maybe that they will pay for some information that they can consume, like they accept, they really, that is useful for them.
A comment? Okay. As for the decline of local news media, of course, as Roberta is saying, the willingness to pay for news, it's fundamental and it needs to be somehow tackled. I think that more broadly, we would need a sort of mindset change, a cultural change, and also innovations. Actually, we're looking at the data. Subscriptions are increasing in the last years, no, for many newspapers. And this actually is digital ones, yes, of course, digital ones in particular. And this is also led by the fact that newspapers put paywalls. And this actually overall threaten the access to information. So I think that in the digital environment, we would need a sort of shift. I think that, for example, a sort of Spotify of news, it's something that we need to think of. Of course, it is something that's been already discussed, but no one has been able to actually do this. But as far as I'm concerned, as I see the digital news consumption from especially the younger generation, that will be one of the main innovations that we truly need.
Okay, I suggest we organize the next seminar on the topic of press freedom between the free and less free states. I think this is a huge and wide topic. There is one question from online, and I'm giving them a slight priority because, as I said, we can continue the discussion. So this is for Pier, Luigi, and Elda. Very brief remarks, one sentence to close because we are out of time. The question is from Borbala. As for defending media pluralism and freedom, especially regarding the politicization of public service media, how effective do you find the new Media Freedom Act of the EU?
Well, definitely the Article 5 of the European Media Freedom Act defines some very clear standards. Of course, it mandates member states to find ways, to make them respected. And as far as this Article 5 will be active, since its implementation is postponed to 15 months from the publication, if I'm not mistaken. Of course, we can say that immediately this is not a standard that is immediately applicable. But I think that once implemented by the member states, and in general, the fact that there are some principles is already somehow influencing the way public service media should be organized and how the criteria of the independence should be fulfilled. For instance, just to mention an example, in Italy, where there is a pending renewal of the board of governors of RAI, of the PSM. Now we are discussing, and there is a pending case in front of an administrative judge in order to understand whether somehow the principle of ENFA should be immediately applied for the renewal that is that otherwise should be done based on rules that in Italy are considered unconstitutional. So I think that if not immediately, but in the long run, somehow there is some kind of hope to find common standards.
Yes, I want to come back a second in a word exactly on the idea I was explaining about how the monitor should evolve on if we have a European dimension or not. This article is a clear example, in my opinion. If this article becomes something that needs to be respected exactly as written, a new standard of behaviors, then you have a European dimension. All the member states will have to do their public service media under these rules. For instance, in telecommunication, in electricity and so on, there are certain rules about the independence of the authorities. Some of these rules are very precise and now are becoming standard. Every country has to respect them in that way. If this instead remain a programmatic article, then it's only adding explanation to things that we already know, that are already in the general view of public media service and so on. And this is a particularly interesting article because we know how important it is for member states to check their own, to have their own rules on public media service because their own money, their own public television, the political pressure that is on this media and so on. So this will be really one of the cutting edges of how the ENFA will be applied. If this article will be applied saying has to work this way in all Europe, then we have a European dimension. If it's only explaining things to member states to behave better, then we remain where we were before. And this will change somehow the way in which media works in Europe, and particularly public service media, and will change also the way in which we have to monitor.
Thank you all so much. We are running academic quarter beyond time, so we stop here. Again, thanks a lot for your patience and for your questions and interaction, and we continue after with those ones in the room, and thank you all online for joining us, and please do keep in touch with us. As I said, if you think that there are touching points and we can exchange further on these matters. Thanks again.